We're talking NFL draft and specifically Giants draft with NFL Draft Bible's Rick Serritella. He's got some interesting scoops as well to share. All that's coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I am Patricia Traina, and happy Thursday to everybody. Happy to have you with us, as always. Thank you for making the Locked On Giants podcast your first listen of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. And as promised, I am joined by Mr. Rick Serritella. He is with NFL Draft Bible over on SI.com's Fan Nation. Does a great job. He is one of the NFL draft experts, and very happy to have him. He's also a very good friend of mine, which I appreciate more than you know, and very happy to have him with us here on the program. Rick, my friend, always glad to see that smile.
Yeah, it's been way too long, I feel like, since we've done this here, Patricia. So I'm looking forward to it. Always exciting times, and always love hearing back from the Giant faithful. So buckle up.
Yeah. And this is a big draft for the Giants, and we're going to get into all that in just a minute. But first, Rick, I want to get your impression, your overall impression on this year's draft class, where the strengths are, where the concerns are, and how they relate to what the Giant needs are.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's a good year if you want to protect the quarterback or get after the quarterback, right? Two areas that the Giants could surely use help in, and I think they've done a pretty good job kind of repairing some of the offensive line through the free agency. I do think offensive tackle will be in play, which I'm sure we'll get to here in just a moment, but I do think offensive tackles, we could see 5, maybe 6 of them in the first round. Same thing with the edge rushers. I feel like there's a good 5 pass rushers in this draft class that could go in round 1. So I would say those are the 2 biggest strengths on each side of the ball.
Yeah, and of course, those are 2 big needs for the Giants on each side of the ball. So let's start with the offensive side. You know, you mentioned tackles. Now, the Giants in free agency went kind of all out, if you will, on bringing in interior offensive linemen, which to me, they might as well take a billboard in Times Square and say, we're drafting a tackle, because they haven't really addressed that position. They did add Matt Gono from Atlanta, previously with Atlanta, but pretty obvious, I think, the Giants are going to add a right tackle to that mix. Let's look at the top 3 guys here. Who's the best fit for the Giants and why?
You know, I'm a big fan of the North Carolina State tackle, Ekwonu, and I think that he has the highest ceiling. So for me, you know, I think there's a lot of allure there. If I could plug him in on the right side, I know he lacks the prototypical height and length that some of the NFL teams look for, and maybe Evan Neal checks off all the boxes. Icky does not check off the height and length box, but I think he's a better athlete. I think in due time, he'll become the better pro player. So it's close, but for my money, I'm going to go Ekwonu, then Evan Neal, who at 327 pounds or whatever, I mean, you have trouble finding an ounce of fat on this guy. Just an unbelievable physique. You've seen what he's done in the SEC, has a proven track record. Both of these guys play with a tenacious demeanor. And I do think that there is a real scenario here that when the Giants come up to pick at number 5, they can have their pick of the litter. I think there's a real good scenario that all the offensive tackles will be in play. And, of course, Charles Cross from Mississippi State has to be in the conversation, and he's right up there. I mean, it's so close. Any 3 of these guys, I think, would look good in Big Blue.
You mentioned Charles Cross. That's a name that's been gaining some traction as a top 10 draft pick. What does Cross bring? I mean, tell us a little bit more about Cross because, obviously we all know about Evan Neal coming from that Alabama Crimson Tide team. Icky's been getting a lot of press. Charles Cross has been kind of, been picking up steam a little bit. I think the word on him is he's a really good pass protector, but the run blocking isn't quite where it needs to be yet.
Yeah, I think he's a very good pass blocker, but I do think he has the movement skills to improve that run game. I actually think he does a good enough job of getting into the second level. I mean, I've heard some of the knocks against Cross. Another one out there is that he's more of a finesse tackle compared to these other two guys, but I don't see it. I mean, I think he plays very mean, very lean. I think he's going to be a plug and play starter, and maybe he doesn't have as high of a ceiling, but he's a very polished product. Again, playing in the SEC, a proven resume, and a good presence inside the locker room, from what I've heard as well.
There's no such thing as a perfect prospect. So with that said, when you're talking about drafting at number 5 or number 7, roughly what percentage would you say of the characteristics you want for that guy at his position do you think need to be in place so that the guy is not considered a project?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're taking a guy in the top 5, you want to check off as many boxes as possible. You want to eliminate the risk, right? You're going to probably have to pay him a hefty sum. And so you really got to do the background diligence and find out, hey, Kevin Abrams was somebody who I had a chance to speak to out in Indianapolis. And he said, hey, we'll see a guy walking down the hall with his head down and say, hey, what's up, man? What's going on? And it's the social media whispers getting to them. So how much does a guy listen to the outside noise? How much is he checking his Twitter? Does it impact him and affect him? I think when you're talking about a guy, top 5, top 10, they're all talented, right? But the NFL teams are trying to measure what's inside their heart, what's inside their head. How is that outside noise going to impact them? So I think from a physical and talent standpoint, I mean, you should be getting a good proven player at 5. I think trying to get inside a guy's psyche and the mental aspect is so intriguing.
So on that note, I mean, which of the 3 offensive tackles, based on what you know, have the demeanor, if you will, to block out that noise and stand up to the New York market, which is, as you know, can be a very brutal one if you are on the top of your game.
I think, and I haven't had a chance to sit down with them each personally for 15 minutes, but just kind of from what I do know, I think Evan Neal would probably be, we'll say, the best suited, right? Because he's been on the big stage. He's been in national championships. He's played for Nick Saban there at Alabama. So I think, if anybody is kind of used to that spotlight and constantly being in the big stage, well, I mean, we haven't heard a peep from Evan Neal over the past 3 years. So he's done quite a good job there with it.
Interesting perspective, too, because, you go back to the quarterback situation and it's like, okay, we got to take a quarterback who can handle the spotlight of New York. And that is a factor. That is definitely a factor. Now, Rick, there's been some talk that maybe the Giants will go offense and defense in that first round, assuming that they don't trade out of one of those 2 spots. And a name that keeps popping up is Sauce Gardner, especially if the Giants move on from James Bradberry, which they are reportedly looking to do because of that salary cap hit. Is Sauce Gardner a top 10 pick in your estimation? And what does he bring? And how does he fit potentially Wink Martindale's system?
Yeah, I think he's right there. I think on my board, he's right there as like the number 9, number 10 overall prospect. And I think if you're talking about a replacement for James Bradberry, it makes a lot of sense, right? They're both big 6'2" type corners that can move, guard the boundary, guard the number 1 wide receiver, can move around and shadow a wideout too if need be. So I think Sauce Gardner fits from that perspective. Now, if you're talking about number 7, is it a little bit too much rich for my blood? Well, it all depends on who else is on the board, right? And I'm a big believer in best available talent. I think when you start drafting for need, that's where teams get hurt. And if there's a more talented player, such as a Kyle Hamilton from Notre Dame, such as a Kayvon Thibodeau from Oregon, who both players could very well be on the board at 7, I've got to go with the best talent available. So I could justify the Sauce Gardner pick, and I'd be happy with it too. But I'd be ecstatic about a Thibodeau or Hamilton.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would. But that brings up another point. Wink Martindale, in an interview with Giants.com, said he likes cornerbacks. He likes guys with length, the coverage range. He spoke specifically about that position. And if you look at the film of what he used to run in Baltimore, it seemed like, a big main recipe of his defense was having a solid defensive backfield. So to that end, I know you just said best player available, which, I think everybody does, but can you cheat a little bit if you're the Giants and you have a choice between Thibodeau and Kyle Hamilton and Sauce Gardner at 7?
Yeah, I mean, you can, right? And to your point, like, hey, Wink is going to love the fact that he's great in man coverage, because the more man coverage corners you have, the more creative you can get with the pass rush. And it's like the chicken or the egg. Do good corners create a good pass rush, or does a good pass rush create good coverage in the secondary? And so I think that's the kind of formula here that Wink is looking at. Again, for me personally, Kayvon Thibodeau is my number 1 rated player in the draft. I have not wavered from that. I'm not buying into, the whole taking plays off and the poor attitude. To me, he's the best player in the draft. So, I'd have a problem. Also have Kyle Hamilton as my number 2 or number 3 best player in the draft. And choosing a safety high, that's a big debate. Eric Turner, I think 1990 was the 2nd overall player taken in the draft. We saw Jamal Adams, I think number 6 a few years back. So, teams are very hesitant to use a top player on a safety. But I think, when you look at Super Bowl champion teams, maybe not recent memory, but on a consistent basis, a lot of it stems from strong play up the middle of your defense. Go back to the Troy Polamalu and the Bob Sanders of the world, the Seattle Earl Thomas. I mean, these guys were difference makers. And I think Kyle Hamilton is a guy you can line up all over the field. You could even play him at corner if you wanted to, but he could play either safety position. He could get down in the box and play linebacker. And to me, just losing Jabril Peppers in free agency, to me, Kyle Hamilton could make a lot of sense.
You bring up another point I want to ask you about, and we hear the expression positional value a lot. I think that's one of the most overused words, or cliches, I should say, when we're talking about drafting and personnel. I mean, where do you stand on that? And what have you heard from, NFL teams that they're told, oh, you shouldn't draft a Kyle Hamilton in the top 10 because he's a safety, or you shouldn't take a running back at this position, because they don't have the positional value.
I took it straight to the horse's mouth. I had a chance to connect with Brian Dawkins at the Maxwell Club. And I said, Brian, are you familiar with Kyle Hamilton? He said, oh, yeah. I said, what's your thoughts on, kind of the stigma that NFL teams won't use a top selection on a safety? And I was a little bit surprised, because he said, you know what, I couldn't do it because of positional value. He said, if teams aren't valuing it, well, why am I going to be the guy that takes a safety in the top 5? He said, I would look to trade back. And so I thought that was surprising. I think every team is different and on a case-to-case basis. Now, I will say I have a real problem taking a running back in round 1, because, if you look at all the running backs that have been selected in the first round, I don't recall a running back chosen in round 1 that literally carried the team into the Super Bowl, that put the team on the back, was a difference maker, that was the franchise that said, hey, get on my back, I'm going to carry you to the Super Bowl. I don't remember that running back. And so there's so many of those guys. I see players at the running back position that are talented enough to play in the NFL every year, but they don't, because there's just so many of them. And so I have a hard time justifying a first-round pick on a running back position. And I think, the Giants are kind of finding that one out the hard way.
All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up with Rick Serritella of NFL Draft Bible. But first, BetOnline is the number 1 spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline.net is also the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news, whether it's basketball, hockey, boxing, and UFC, plus all your favorite Vegas games. So head on over to the website today, betonline.net, and learn more about the trends and all the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Now, I got to ask you about the quarterback situation in this draft because, a lot of people say that this isn't a strong quarterback class. There's no, you know, blue chip, can't fail, gotta have this guy, like a Mahomes or a Josh Allen or a Joe Burrow. That being said, you do have some quarterback needy teams in this draft. Atlanta, Pittsburgh. You might make a case for Seattle. There are a few. That being said, now, do you anticipate there will be some movement of teams trying to trade up to get quarterbacks, or do you think people are just going to say, you know what, this isn't really a strong enough class. We'll sit tight with what we have, and then next year's class, which from what I understand is going to be a lot better for quarterbacks, then we'll get into that pool because that could potentially affect what the Giants do because, Carolina is believed to be quarterback needy as well. And if a team maybe wants to come up ahead of Carolina. So I guess I'm just trying to gauge what the realistic scenario might be for a team to come up that needs a quarterback to maybe, swap with the Giants.
Yeah, and I think, Carolina at 6, who you alluded to, I think is where you might see the first domino fall. And if they don't take a quarterback, I think, one, it'll be very telling, and I'll get back to that in a second. Two, it'll put the Giants in prime position, right? Like if a team like the Steelers, now the Steelers at 20, I don't know if they have enough to jump up to number 7, but if a team like that is trying to get ahead of the Seattles of the world and some of these other franchises, well, the Giants could be in prime position to trade back again and accumulate more picks. So I think they're going to be very anxious to see what Matt Rule and the Carolina Panthers do at 6. I got to say, Kenny Pickett committed to Temple when Rule was there prior to him taking the job at Baylor. I know the owner of Carolina, David Tepper, is a graduate of Pittsburgh. And that's why I say, if you saw the pro day on the NFL Network, you saw Rule, you saw Tepper, you saw Fitterer, they're all there. They're telling Kenny Pickett to take off the gloves, show me how you grip the football. So there's genuine interest there. And I do think Pickett is the most pro-ready quarterback to step in and potentially play in year one. Now, I'll give you an interesting backstory. On my way to the Combine, you'll appreciate this because if you fly United, then it's always Terminal C, right? And so here I am flying out to the Combine on United. I just automatically go to Terminal C. They say, hey, your flight's actually in Terminal A. Well, I wasn't the only one that made the mistake. Kenny Pickett made the same mistake. The New York Giants scout made the same mistake. And so we had to shuttle from Terminal C over to Terminal A. Here I am in the front of the bus, no logos, no draft Bible, just a morning hoodie and hey, don't bother me type of thing. And there's the Giants scout and Kenny Pickett on the back of the bus having a casual conversation. And spoiler alert, for those of you who don't want to hear what I'm about to say, turn off the podcast now. But in so many words, they told Kenny Pickett in a nice, friendly, roundabout way, nice career at Pittsburgh, but we're not going to be drafting it. And it sounded like the Giants won't be drafting a quarterback in round 1 at all.
Interesting scoop. And by the way, it's always Terminal A going out, Terminal C coming back. I don't know why that is, but in all the years I've been going to the Combine, that's how it's been. I don't know why. And it's the same size plane. Go figure.
Patricia, at least somebody's paying attention.
I know. My husband can't figure that out because he's always like, oh, Terminal C. I'm like, no, Terminal A going out, Terminal C coming back, which kind of stinks because Terminal C's got so much more in terms of shops and restaurants and stuff, and Terminal A's got nothing.
You got to know your ABCs.
Well, that's why I always buy a pass to go into the lounge at United. So, but that's a great story. That's an interesting story, and not surprising because the Giants, they have said up and down. John Mara said it. Brian Daboll said it. Joe Shane has said it. They're committed to seeing what Daniel Jones has this year. This is a make or break year for him, and if this kid can't step up under Daboll and develop into the type of quarterback they think he can be, then I'm pretty sure next year quarterback is going to be on their docket. I mean, Daniel Jones, The jury's still out on him.
Is it? Because, I mean, he's got, I think, 29 interceptions and 26 lost fumbles and 37 starts. It's eerily similar to his Duke turnover ratio. I think he had 56 turnovers and 36 starts in college. So in the last 60 or 70 games that Daniel Jones has played, I mean, this guy has 75 plus turnovers. And so I just don't know if you can change that DNA of a player. And it's unfortunate, but I just can't get past the turnovers and the poor decisions and the interceptions and the fumble, not just the fumbles, but the lost fumbles. And I don't know, after 6 years of seeing it, I just don't think a light switch is suddenly going to turn on and change his DNA. I've been very unpopular here with Giants fans with my philosophy, but I mean, I just wasn't a big fan out of Daniel Jones coming out. I couldn't see it. I didn't see it then. I don't see it now.
Well, I think they overdrafted him in hindsight. I mean, I had him at 17 that year. I thought if they were going to take a quarterback, I figured, 17, not at 6. I figured pass rusher. And spoiler alert here, I later found out that they came pretty close to taking, I think Josh Allen was the pass rusher on the board at the time. And they came so close, but at the last second, they said, you know what? I guess they had gotten wind that another team was looking at Daniel Jones, and they wanted Daniel, and that's the danger you have when you fall in full bloom love with a guy. It's like you'll move heaven and earth to get him, and sometimes it's not the best value for your team. But that's unfortunately that's water under the bridge. They can't go back and change that. So, Rick, let's talk about day 2 and day 3 prospects, because that's where, scouts really earn their money. GMs really earn their money. We could pick the top, the first round picks, no problem. But who are some of the under the radar guys we should be maybe paying attention to for the Giants in day 2?
Oh boy, well, there's so many good ones, and let's not forget about the priority free agents, because you asked me at the beginning of the show about the strengths of this class, and it's not as star-studded in terms of blue chip prospects, but it is very, very deep, and that's because of the COVID-19 pandemic allowing all those players an extra year of eligibility. Last year on our big board, we only had 725 draft eligible players. This year, we've got over 1,300 players on the board. So the draft class is almost twice as big of a pool of players this year. And so I think you're going to see some very talented players go undrafted that deserve to be drafted. And, we had a good one at the NFLPA Collegiate Bowl. If you're looking for a developmental quarterback, in Akil Glass out of Alabama A&M. He also participated in the HBCU Legacy Bowl. So if you want to just kind of maybe groom a guy and bring him along, he's a tall pocket passer, strong arm guy, can make all the throws. Talk about a day 3 guy right here in our own backyard, Sacred Heart running back, Julius Chestnut. He is a run, catch, block, triple threat, poor man's, the running back out of New England that they took a year ago. The name is slipping my mind, but he reminds me very much of that running back, and he can do it all. He's 230 pounds, ran a 4.47 40-yard dash at his pro day workout. Jaquez Ezzard out of Sam Houston State is a guy that if you take a look at what Deebo Samuel, how he's being employed or utilized in that San Francisco offense, this kid out of Sam Houston State, now here's a kid who did put the team on his back in the FCS playoff 2 years ago in the spring, and Sam Houston State ran the table. Anyone who watched the FCS playoffs knows Jaquez Ezzard is a guy that when he catches fire, I mean, there's no turning back. And those are just some skill position guys. I think inside the trenches, the Giants seem pretty set there on the interior. So, Jack Wollaball, if they want some depth at center at a Duke, is a guy that's kind of caught my attention. The SMU center that was at the East-West Shrine Bowl, he could play all 3 interior spots. I love that guy to death. Let's talk about defense a little bit here. Joshua Williams from Fayetteville State, the cornerback, and Gregory Jr. out of Ochita Baptist. I mean, anybody who's followed me knows I love the small school gems. These are 2 cornerbacks here. They have size, they have speed. I spoke to Rod Woodson about Gregory Jr. He said, man, this kid is legit. And it was no surprise that we had him out at the NFL PA Bowl, and he did get the call to the Senior Bowl, and he balled out, and he crushed every process throughout the whole pre-draft. And linebackers, I mean, I was at the Rutgers Pro Day and Boston College Pro Day. There's a couple good ones there. Loco Ocho, Isaiah Graham Mobley. He really had a great workout, and it opened up people's eyes. I don't think the mainstream media really knew too much about him until he was invited out to the NFL Scouting Combine. But this is a guy, when you talk about Slater in New England, Graham Mobley's a guy that could hang out for a decade just playing special teams. So I love his DNA. And then Ola Fatakusi from Rutgers and Tyreek Maddox-Williams. We actually both play at Rutgers. Those are two guys. Fatakusi, Greg Schiano said, is the most pro-ready player in terms of any Rutgers player in this year's draft class that's ready to step in and play immediately. New York fans will be familiar with his brother who played with the Jets and I think recently signed with the Jaguars. And Tyreek Maddox-Williams has so much upside. He just looks the part. He's like Paul Orndorff, body beautiful. And, hey, I could rattle off the day 2, day 3 sleepers for days. But, man, that's really – you're right. That's where the NFL teams do make their money. And I always like to point out that 27 to 33% of every NFL roster consists of undrafted free agents. So don't underestimate – the day 4, we'll call it.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a big, I mean, Giants not with a lot of money, but I could see them potentially going crazy and getting guys in. It'll be interesting to see if they bring in a lot of, local kids. That's what they've always done in the past. They bring in, 1 or 2 local kids that end up making the roster or at least the practice squad. And I don't know if the NFL is going to keep the same practice squad rules that they had the last 2 years for COVID. I'm hoping they do. I actually like those rules, that with the injured reserve being able to return guys after, an unlimited number of guys after 3 weeks. So hopefully they
jobs. Yeah. By the way, Anthony Bugg, the safety out of Monmouth, he got an invitation to the Giants local day, and he's a 4-year starter at Monmouth, over 400 tackles, I think, and he was jumping through the gymnasium at Pro Day. So there's a perfect example. And I think tight end is a position that doesn't have the studs, but it has some pretty good depth to it. And I think tight end is a good possibility for the Giants, maybe in the middle rounds as well.
I was just going to ask you actually about tight end because, the Giants are starting from scratch. They added Ricky Seals-Jones, who's, I don't think he's a TE1. I mean, he's a solid player, but not a tight end 1. I was going to ask you for some names because you're right. There aren't a lot of studs, in the way of a Kyle Pitts, for example, or a Pat Freiermuth from last year. So who are some other names at tight end that you think might be a good fit for what Brian Daboll historically has run in Buffalo and will potentially run here with the Giants?
Yeah, I think I look at a guy like Greg Dulcich from UCLA. I mean, this guy has just grown on me. And, I forget which All-Star game he participated in, but I really remember him impressing me with his route running and hands. I think it might have been the Senior Bowl. But he can also move inside and block a little bit. Jalen Weidermeyer from Texas A&M is a big pass-catching tight end type. So I could see, like Dawson Knox really came on last year for the Buffalo Bills as a pass catcher. And so if they're looking to incorporate a pass catcher, then maybe Weidermeyer from Texas A&M could be had. And I don't think he ran great at the 40-yard dash at his pro day, but he's still an incredible athlete. Cade Otton, some people will tell you, is the most well-rounded tight end out of Washington because of his pass catching and blocking ability. And so Okafor, you talk about a day 3 guy from the East-West Shrine game. The school is slipping my mind, but this Okafor kid sticks out to me, and I think he could be a late round possibility. So the tight end class, it has some depth to it. It doesn't have that clear, to your point, the Freiermuth guy that's going to come in, make a huge mega impact, but they do have to, despite the drops. Evan Ingram did have to be accounted for because he could run the seam. He had the speed to stretch some defenses. And so the opponents were at least aware of that. And I think they need to kind of replace that presence somewhat. Ricky Seals-Jones just isn't going to cut it there.
Now, another position that doesn't get talked about a lot. Now, the Giants kind of filled it in free agency, but only on a 1-year deal, and that's nose tackle. And, because the Giants lost Austin Johnson, they signed Justin Ellis, I believe, to be the nose tackle. He used to be with Wink, if I'm not mistaken, down in Baltimore. But who are some pure nose tackles, some guys who can maybe, line up at the 0 or maybe the 1 eye or, just kind of move around that defensive line?
Yeah, I think on our board, we have about a half dozen nose tackles with the draftable grade, and obviously Jordan Davis being the biggest one of them. And, it's funny because I had a chance to catch up with Jordan at the Maxwell Club Awards where he was being honored. And I asked him point blank, I said, Jordan, what do you think about, all the criticism out there that you had to come out on third downs and, what's your thoughts? And he said, well, he said, I did a lot of self-reflection. I've heard what the people have said. And he said, that's been my entire focus this whole offseason leading up to the draft, is just improving my pass rush so I can be a 3-down player. Now, part of it might be, maybe he wasn't the most impressive pass rusher, but part of it too, let's be honest, that Georgia Bulldogs defense, I mean, those guys are 2-3 deep with NFL players. So the rotation there, a guy like Trayvon Walker, who we haven't even talked about yet, could line up inside, outside. So to me, I'm a big Jordan Davis fan. I love the player and I love the person even more. So he would be my number one guy. If you're looking for a late round guy and he's got some NFL bloodlines, Noah Ellis out of Idaho. This guy's a 350-pound, just plugging in 2 down. He is a 2-down thumper. Don't expect him to play third downs. But if you're looking for, strong play on like a Snacks Harrison type of guy that can stuff the run, Noah Ellis out of Idaho is a guy that's worth keeping an eye on.
Yeah. There's a bunch of this draft class. I'm just amazed at how deep it is. I mean, and like you said earlier, because kids got a chance to go back to school because of COVID, they were able to to stock up and really give NFL teams options here. So, all right, final question for you, Rick. Who are some of the names that media and fans seem to be in love with, who you think the scouting community might feel aren't as high on?
The quarterbacks.
Besides the quarterbacks, obviously. that's a given.
Yeah. So, Isaiah Spiller is a guy that I still see very high on boards, which, I'm a fan of the runner out of Texas A&M. But I see him being kind of as the second or third running back in this year's draft. And I think he ran, mid 4.6. He's in that Alfred Morris range in the 40-yard dash. And I just have a hard time seeing him as a top 50 talent. So CJ Spiller, or not CJ, Isaiah Spiller. I'm dating myself, showing my age. Isaiah Spiller out of Texas A&M would probably be one. Traylon Burks, I think, has a little bit of hit or miss to him. I wasn't like all in on Traylon Burks, and a lot of people were anticipating him running in the 4.4 range, which I did not see personally. And he ran in that low to mid 4.55 range. But just, I think he's a really good college player, but I don't see the separation ability at the next level. He's more of just a possession guy. And, Laquan Treadwell comes to mind. Like, I just don't know if his skills translate to the NFL level. So that might be one guy. On the defensive side, I mean, I got to say, I don't see Aiden Hutchinson as a slam dunk number 1 overall prospect. I mean, I've got maybe 3 or 4 guys personally ahead of Aiden Hutchinson. And so I don't know if I'm, don't view him as highly, but to me, I wouldn't take him with the number 1 pick personally.
First person I've heard say that, actually. It's interesting. What do you think of Cook, the running back out of Georgia, Dalvin's younger brother?
Yeah. He showed me something during this draft process too, because he was kind of in that committee backfield there in Georgia. But I love his wiggle. He's elusive in the open field. He's got some shiftiness to him. He can keep it inside. He can cut it outside. Looks like a capable pass catcher. So I kind of see him in that third or fourth round range. He is like one of my top five. He's like really like 5 or 6 on my board there. And, I think he could complement the Giants well.
So many choices. I mean, if you're Joe Shane, I mean, I'd like to see them trade down and get some more picks for next year, just in case they've got to come up and get a quarterback. Hopefully they won't have to, but I think you've got to prepare if you're the Giants, wouldn't you say?
You gotta prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And anytime you can accumulate or stockpile draft picks, I think you've got to look into it and explore it. I've always been a big advocate of accumulating draft picks rather than spending my draft picks and moving out. I know the Rams have a different philosophy altogether, but to me, I always felt like the best way to build a team is through the draft. The most cost-efficient way is to build through the draft. And they're like lotto tickets, right? The more you have, the better shot.
Yeah. I mean, how far down do you think they would have to go to get a nice package of picks that includes next year?
Well, you got to look at some of these teams that have multiple picks. And I know Philadelphia has a bunch of picks. They've been on record that they're in on Jalen Hurts, so I'm not sure if they're necessarily moving up. But you got to find a team like the Seahawks now have a whole bunch of picks, and again, publicly they're claiming they're all in on the Drew Lock wagon. But I mean, I'm not so sure there. So I think you've got to kind of look at some of these teams that have the multiple picks that need a quarterback. Seattle comes to mind. The Washington football team, even though they signed or traded for Carson Wentz, I'd be probably looking for an alternative there. But hey, that's a story for another day.
Yeah, and I don't think the Giants would trade down with Washington. I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't see that trade happening. But Pittsburgh's a team I'd be intrigued to see whether or not they might swing something there, because I think they've got a pretty good working relationship with Pittsburgh, and that would be a team.
Pittsburgh's been making the rounds at the pro days with all these quarterbacks, so there's smoke, sometimes there's fire.
Well, it's going to be an interesting draft, a big one for the Giants, because look, Joe Shane has said he wants to build this team up through the draft, free agency. They handed out a bunch of veterans salary benefit deals, 1-year deals, stopgaps, if you will, to get these young kids, get some talent back into the pipeline, which the Giants definitely need to do. Going to be so much fun these next few weeks, as pro days start to wrap up and we get word of draft visits and all that stuff. Rick, I don't know about you, but I'm excited for this draft.
I can't wait. I mean, we're just inside a month, I believe. And is there a better city to host it in than Las Vegas? So, here we go.
And you're headed out there, right?
I will be on location out there at the great MGM resorts.
Oh, nice. So you'll get to see the guys coming across on the boats. I guess they're going to
gondola, right? Are they
yes.
coming to the gondola?
Only in Vegas, right? All right, Rick, before I let you go, tell everybody about NFL Draft Bible, what you got coming up. I think you guys do put out a publication, or you have a database or something. Tell everybody what you got.
No, I appreciate that. And we've converted over to the digital format this year. And you can go to si.com/NFL/draft, which is the home of the NFL Draft Bible. And right up on the top right of your screen, you'll see the subscribe button. That'll unlock access to over 600 scouting reports, not just for 2022. We've got scouting reports for 2023 and beyond. Again, 1,300 players graded and ranked. And, it's just unbelievable that we've been doing this now 20 years. And it's just an incredible amount of insight and tidbits from all of my school visits and travels. And you just can't get that kind of information unless you're, in the building, talking to the coaches, talking to the cafeteria workers, hanging out with the parents in the tailgate. And I learn a lot about these players. And so we provide it all over at the NFL Draft Bible. And 20 years. This year is our 20-year anniversary. And so we're happy to be part of the Fan Nation Network on Sports Illustrated along with yourself and so many other great publishers that hopefully I'll get a chance to run into some of you guys out in Vegas as well.
I know. I mean, and you do a fantastic job, just so thorough. And folks, I can speak to this because I have access to all of Rick's reports over at NFL Draft Bible. They're fantastic. I mean, if you like what Nick Filato's been doing for us here at Giants Country or on Giants Country, you will like what Rick has been doing over at NFL Draft Bible. Rick and his staff, just tremendous stuff. I highly recommend you check it out. Rick, my friend, always a pleasure having you on. Always a pleasure talking ball and just life in general. I mean, gosh, we've known each other for so long now, and it's truly a blessing to count you amongst my friends and colleagues. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on with me today.
Absolutely. Nothing but love for Giants country, yourself, Patricia, your loyal fan following who I'm sure I'll hear from after this show, the good, the bad, the ugly. And yeah, us Jersey tough people have to stay together and hope for the best, for the big blue nation and bring back the toughness with this new regime, the new identity. I want to see them get it turned around and rejuvenate the fan base, right? Like that's what we need. And so I think they've got the right people in place. We'll see in a month what direction they go. But this has been a lot of fun. We'll have to do it again after the draft.
Absolutely. We'll definitely look to have you on. So thank you, Rick. Thank you, Giant fans, as always, for making the Locked On Giants podcast your first listen of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. Be sure to hit that subscribe and like button and that little bell to get notifications. We're going to probably have some shorts coming up, especially around draft time, and we'll have more guests for you. We're going to still have other draft analysts are going to be on. Austin Gale's going to join us from Pro Football Focus. We're going to have the Locked On hosts coming on from the various college programs. So much is coming up. Plus, the Giants have a mini camp, I believe, coming up later this month. So you'll want to keep it here on the Locked On Giants podcast. For Rick Serritella, I'm Patricia Traina. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the Locked On Giants podcast. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.